Good morning. This is Ron. It is Thursday, May the 10th, and welcome to Storytime. So, yes, today is Thursday, May the 10th. That means yesterday's broadcast was on May the 9th, not May the 8th, as I said yesterday. So, now after that little piece of housekeeping, on to bigger and better things. And so I've been listening to Rush Limbaugh this morning, listening to his monologue, and he was talking about President Trump's getting out of the Iran deal. And he said that there was, part of what he had discussed yesterday was that he noted that Barack Obama's legacy, President Obama's legacy, is being dismantled one piece at a time. And he noted, which of these things that are gone. The Paris Climate Accord is gone. Now the Iran nuclear deal is gone, et cetera, et cetera. And he named several off. And this clip was produced on CNN, and a pundit on CNN that responded to it, saying that it is a shame and that it's dangerous, and that also it is evidence of vandalism by one administration against another. So all of those are meant to be trigger statements. They're emotionally oriented, psychologistic, and they're meant to bait the unwary into defending nothing, into defending yourself against nothing. And of course, Rush Limbaugh took the bait and started laying out, no, it's not this, it's not that. This is Donald Trump is doing the right thing, basically defending Donald Trump against nothing, against no criticism whatsoever. And the problem with when you're dealing with arbitrary statements, because that's what they are, if they have no evidence, no proof, and there's no logical construct to put together to validate the conclusion, then you have an arbitrary statement, and it must be ignored. And the reason is that if you go ahead and try to address an issue that doesn't exist, all you end up doing is achieving is the opposite of what you intended to. In the case of racism, if you're arbitrarily called a racist and you start responding to that, you just end up looking like a racist who's trying to get away with something. And the same thing goes here. You start defending Donald Trump, but you don't understand, then it just looks like that you and Donald Trump are trying to get away with something. What you need to do, what Mr. Limbaugh needs to do, and Sean Hannity, because he does it all the time as well, is listen carefully to what's being said, and arbitrary statements must be identified as arbitrary and ignored. No further comments or justifications or rationalizations or whatever should be, no more attention should be paid to these arbitrary statements. And this is, again, where the right aids and abets the left. If the left is going to win in this country, if this is going to be turned into some type of a socialist country, we're going to turn into the next Venezuela, make the left earn it. Make them earn it. I have less of a problem with this country ending up going left if the left in this country has won by clawing, scratching, and fighting for every inch that they get. What I can't stand is the idea of victory being handed to them by the very people that are supposed to be the bulwarks against socialism. Okay, so when I come back, I'm going to finish up the case against liberal compassion in Imprimis magazine. Okay, I'm back, and the case against liberal compassion in Imprimis, done by who is this? By, let's see, it is William Vogeley, who's the senior editor of Claremont Review of Books. So, and as I've noted, and basically what this is a piece where He goes on and on, making note of the fact that liberals have set things up, set the table in such a way as to make themselves look automatically more compassionate than Republicans. And what he fails to note, however, is that the only reason that that quote unquote liberals, i.e., socialists, get away with this is because Republicans allow it to happen, either because they're too indifferent or too stupid to figure out what's going on. The satisfaction of pious preening. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Latinate word compassion means literally suffering together with another. It is the feeling or emotion when a person is moved by the suffering or distress of another and by the desire to relieve it. Note that suffering together does not mean suffering identically. The compassionate person does not become hungry when he meets or thinks about a hungry person, or sick in the presence of the sick. Rather, compassion means we are affected by others' suffering, a distress that motivates us to alleviate it. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote in Emile, when the strength of an expansive soul makes me identify myself with my fellow, and I feel that I am, so to speak, in him, it is in order not to suffer that I do not want him to suffer. I am interested in him for love of myself. We can see the problem. The whole point of compassion is for empathizers to feel better when awareness of another's suffering provokes unease. But this ultimate purpose does not guarantee that empathizees will fare better. Barbara Oakley, co-editor of the volume Pathological Altruism, defines its subject as altruism in which attempts to promote the welfare of others instead result in unanticipated harm. Surprise and accidents happen, of course. The pathology of pathological altruism is not the failure to salve every wound. It is rather the indifference, blithe, heedless, smug, or solipsistic, to the fact and consequences of those failures, just as long as the empathizer is accruing compassion points that he and others will admire. As philosophy professor David Schmitz has said, if you're trying to prove your heart is in the right place, it isn't. Indeed, if you're trying to prove your heart is in the right place, the failure of government programs to alleviate suffering is not only an acceptable outcome, but in many ways the preferred one. Sometimes empathizers, such as those in the helping professions, acquire a vested interest in the study, management, and perpetuation as opposed to the solution and resulting disappearance of sufferers' problems. This is why so many government programs initiated to conquer a problem end up instead colonizing it by building sprawling settlements where the helpers and the helped are endlessly, increasingly codependent. Even where there are no material benefits to addressing without ever reducing other people's suffering, there are vital psychic benefits for those who regard their own compassion as the central virtue that makes them good, decent, and admirable people. People whose sensitivity readily distinguishes them from mean-spirited conservatives. Pity is about how deeply I can feel, wrote the late political theorist Jean Bethke Eleshtain. Quote, and in order to feel this way, to experience the rush of my own pious reaction, I need victims the way an addict needs drugs, unquote. It follows then that the answer to the question of how liberals who profess to be anguished about other people's suffering can be so weirdly complacent regarding wasteful, misdirected, and above all, ineffective government programs created to relieve that suffering is that liberals care about helping much less than they care about caring, because compassion gives me a self-regarding reason to care about your suffering. It's more important for me to do something than to accomplish something. Once I've voted for, given a speech about, written an editorial endorsing, or held forth at a dinner party on the salutary generosity of some program to address your problems, my work is done, and I can feel the rush of my own pious reaction. There's no need to stick around for the complex, frustrating, mundane work of making sure the program that made me feel better just by being established and praised has actually alleviated your suffering. This assessment also provides an answer to the question of why liberals always want a bigger welfare state. It's because the politics of kindness is about validating oneself rather than helping others, which means the proper response to suffering is always, we need to do more, and never, we need to do what we're already doing better and smarter. That is, liberals react to an objective reality in a distinctly perverse way. The reality is, first, that there are many instances of poverty, insecurity, and suffering in our country, and second, that public expenditures to alleviate poverty, insecurity, and suffering amount to $3 trillion or some $10,000 per American much of it spent on the many millions of Americans who are nowhere near being impoverished, insecure, or suffering. If the point of liberalism were to alleviate suffering as opposed to preening about one's abhorrence of suffering and proud support for government programs designed to reduce it, liberals would get up every morning determined to reduce the proportion of that $3 trillion outlay that ought to be helping the poor but is instead being squandered in some way, including by being showered on people who aren't poor. But since the real point of liberalism is to alleviate the suffering of those distressed by others' suffering, the hard work of making our $3 trillion welfare state machine work optimally is much less attractive, less gratifying than demanding that we expand it and condemning those who are skeptical about that expansion for their greed and cruelty. Those of us accused of being greedy and cruel for standing athwart the advance of liberalism and expansion of the welfare state do have things to say, then, in response to the empathy crusaders. Compassion really is important. Clifford Orwin, a political scientist who has examined the subject painstakingly, believes our strong, spontaneous proclivity to be distressed by others' suffering confirms the ancient Greek philosopher's belief that nature intended for human beings to be friends. But compassion is neither all-important nor supremely important in morals, and especially politics. It is nice, all things being equal, to have government officials who feel our pain rather than ones like imperious monarchs, who, like imperious monarchs, cannot comprehend or do not deign to notice it. Much more than our rulers' compassion, however, we deserve their respect for us, our rights, our capacity, and responsibility to feel and heal our own pains without their ministrations, and for America's carefully constructed, heroically sustained experiment in constitutional self-government, which errs on the side of caution and republicanism by denying even the most compassionate official a monarch's plenary powers. Kindness may well cover all of Barack Obama's political beliefs and those of many other self-satisfied, pathologically altruistic liberals. It doesn't begin to cover all the beliefs that have sustained America's republic, however, nor does it amount to a safe substitute for those moral virtues and political principles necessary to sustain it further. Okay, so again, this is that's the end of the case against liberal compassion, and largely this is a failure. This article was a waste of time and a waste of writing, and the primary reason is because it's psychologistic in nature. What the author has done is said that, well, there's a problem out there, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to psychoanalyze those that are involved in the problem and ask the question, why do Democrats do things a certain particular way? And he was rather deft at breaking things down, and it seems to make on the surface a lot of sense. However, he didn't produce a whole lot of evidence. For instance, there could be alternative reasons for why the Democrats are doing what they're doing. How about the idea of having a socialist revolution and socialist paradise? And the whole idea of creating all these programs is simply to go ahead and agitate in that direction. Or it could have an economic issue. This is a Keynesian economy. The government is supposed to spend money in order to prevent a recession or depression, but the government has to have things to spend the money on. It's not just going to walk out in the street and throw it around to whoever happens to pass by. So, hence the welfare state. Why couldn't that be the answer? But in any case, the point is that by psychologizing the whole situation, the problem, and any problem, what you're doing is you're paying homage to the left, because this is the way the left operates. They look at the world as being psychologistic in nature because they deny the existence of reality, i.e., of objectivity, and so therefore everything is a matter of attitude. And that it becomes an issue of everything is a matter of attitude. You have a good attitude or you have a bad attitude. And what they're getting away from by turning everything into an attitude issue is they're getting away from right and wrong. This article would have been much more effective and could have been a brilliant piece had it addressed the ethical issues in terms of liberal compassion, something, well, the welfare program, social security, whatever, and pick it out and say it's wrong, and it's wrong for these reasons, and this is what we should be doing instead. That is much more intellectually satisfying and much more potent socio-politically. So that's what Mr. Vogely should have done. Unfortunately, he and many others fall into that trap of always analyzing. When you hear somebody, particularly somebody on the right, if it's on the radio or on the television, describing why they think somebody is doing something, they're psychologizing. They're getting into the psychologistic psychoanalysis, and it's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. What they should be doing is analyzing it from an ethical standpoint. Is whatever this person doing right or wrong? Let's take Abraham Lincoln as a classic example. He did the Emancipation Proclamation. Was he right to do so, or was he wrong to do so? He was right to do so, obviously, because slavery is obviously, axiomatically wrong. Now, nobody bothered, and you notice that nobody bothers today either to psychoanalyze Abraham Lincoln. They don't go back and say, gee, what was his true motives in creating the Emancipation? Well, you have it every once in a while. People will do it on the margins, but by and large, they don't. They don't go and look and say, well, Abraham Lincoln did this because he needed to feel better about himself or because he wanted to change the psyche of the American people. No, it is clear what he wanted to do was free the slaves. He knew that slavery was wrong, morally wrong, reprehensible, and needed to be stopped as soon as possible. That's why he did it. He did it for intellectual reasons, for the right intellectual reasons, and that we can figure out. We can look he is in his debates explained, his reasoning about his position as far as slavery is concerned. But the point is, he addressed it from a right and wrong issue, and whether or not he's right or wrong should be looked at from an ethical issue rather than avoiding the ethical issue and analyzing him psychoanalyzing his decision to make the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, when he was making the decision as to whether or not to do the Emancipation Proclamation, he was making the decision intellectually. He was not psychologizing. He was not looking at this from a standpoint of power. Is this going to be the most powerful thing for me to do? He is going to be looking at it from a standpoint of, is this what's right? And there's a saying that you should do what's right, let the chips fall where they may. This is a classic example, Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, of a political figure that did exactly that. He took a huge risk because he didn't try to get Machiavellian about it and get into all the, if I do this, what's my opponent's going to do? Well, then what will I do? He doesn't try to game theory the whole thing. He knows what's right, he does what's right, and he's willing to accept the consequences. He's hoping that the consequences are going to be more right than wrong or more good than bad, that it's going to be more beneficial to this country, and that he's going to end up being regarded in a positive way in his presidency, rather than being slandered or worse. So again, he went ahead and did things intellectually and from a right and wrong standpoint. And that's what Mr. Vogely should have done. Look at the issues of liberal compassion and whether or not, particularly in regards to using the government to be compassionate rather than using churches and charities to be compassionate, and make a statement about what is right, what is wrong in that regard, and then you're making a much more powerful statement, and you're telling people where they should. You're actually promoting conservatism. In this particular article, it has the smack of being neutral, that he bent over backwards to be neutral and let other people make their own decision. That seems to be popular today, and it is popular because of socialists in this country who've made it popular, who've popularized that idea of being neutral and let other people decide. No, if you have to be honest, and part of being honest and candid, and part of being honest and candid is you have a position. You're not neutral. I'm not neutral. You're not neutral. Mr. Vogely is not neutral. We all have positions. We all have uh, things that we know, we understand, and believe in, and we would like other people to know, understand, and believe the same way we do. And that's where you try to make a case. You bring facts and logic and try to make your case to convince or persuade those people to join your side. So, from that standpoint, again, this fails. It doesn't. It's very non-committal. It's very neutral, and it shouldn't be. Mr. Vogely has a position here. He should be stating it boldly and forthrightly, and he would have a much better article as a result. Okay, that's going to be the end. This is going to be a shorter version of story time today, and so that's going to conclude it for today. And until tomorrow, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.